In this video, you're going to convert a simple layout of a form like this one to a slightly more advanced layout like this. So if you look at the final layout, you can see that the labels are arranged inside a column. And you can also see that the inputs are arranged inside another column. If you look at the Submit button, you can see that it spans over the width of the two columns which are occupied previously by the labels and the inputs. So let's go ahead and build this by creating a grid container and controlling the dimensions of the columns only, then specifying the areas of the labels and the inputs using columns alone without having to look at rows. So at the moment, I've created the form and I added some basic styling to the form. And by the way, when we go to the inputs and set their font size using the M units, this will be relative to the font size of the form. So 1M is going to correspond to the font size of the parent of the inputs, which is the form, and that's 20 pixels. All right. So first of all, let's convert our form to a grid container. So we're going to use the display property, which I'm going to set to grid. So at the moment, we've got one column where everything is laid out. So each item occupies one column because we haven't specified anything yet. Now let's add a gap between the rows and columns. So grid gap, and let's set that to 5 pixels, for example. Here we go. Now, just to see the dimensions of the labels, I'm going to set the background color temporarily to something like a green yellow. So you can see that at the moment, the labels occupy the full width of the container. Okay. So now let's move to the columns and specify their dimensions inside our templates. So grid template columns. And let's say that we want the first column to occupy a minimum width, which is the width necessary to fit the content. So to do this, you can use the value auto. Then the next column is going to occupy any remaining space. So one free space, like this. So let's have a look at our layouts. So you can see that our items have already been arranged like this. So the labels go in the first column and the inputs go in the second column. And that's simply because in our HTML, if you look inside the form, the first item is label. So it went into the first column. The second item is input. It went into the second column. And then label again went into the first column. And then we carry on. And we auto-complete like this, just by specifying the dimensions of the columns. So we didn't have to look at the rows at all. So the rows just get auto-completed here. Now, if you've got something inside the form, like a paragraph, this is a form, then it's going to mess up everything, because now your first item is a paragraph, and it's going to go inside the first column. Then your label, which comes right after the paragraph, is going to go in the second column, right? So let's change the contents of this paragraph and say, please input your address. So what we need to do here, we need to go to the labels and specify their area inside our grid layout. So how are we going to do this without having to create areas like we did in the previous video? So there is something really handy when it comes to the grid template, you can actually name the columns. So just before the values, you're allowed actually to place a name inside brackets like this. So I'm going to call the first column label and the second column input like this. Then I'm going to set the grid column property of the label to label like this, so that it goes to the label column. And then I'm going to go to the input and set its grid column property to input. So the values that we give to the grid column should match the values that we use to name the columns. And now our layout looks much better. But we're still not done yet, because we need the submit button to occupy the width of 2 columns. So what I need to do now is select the input button or the submit button. So to select it, I'm going to use its type. So I'm going to go to the form, then select the input of type submit like this. And then I'm going to use the grid column property, and I'm going to say that it's going to span over 2 columns. So to do this, you write span space 2 like this. So this means that the button will span over 2 columns. And here we are. We are now done. And we've got the right layout we wanted from the beginning. And I can now go back to the background color of the labels and remove it. And we can delete the paragraph as well. So hopefully this gave you a good idea about how to auto-complete a form using the grid column property. So in the coming videos, you're going to get introduced to some even more advanced properties that you can use with the grid layout.